Is the Volkswagen Touareg a bargain Bentley Bentayga, or is it an expensive SUV that's difficult to recommend? In this review, we're finding out. The Touareg was first released in the early 2000s, and that first generation model was actually developed alongside the Porsche Cayenne and the Audi Q7. Then, in 2010, there was a second generation model, and this is a third generation Touareg, which we first saw in 2018, but it's recently had a facelift. Now, the changes aren't huge, but it includes some revisions to the suspension and also some styling tweaks as well, mainly new lights at the front and new lights at the back. You can see you've now got this light bar that stretches across the whole of it, and this VW badge is actually backlit. Inside, apart from some stitching on the dashboard and a slightly different design here, there really isn't much new to point out in this Touareg. So that means pretty much everything is the same as it was before, which means setting up a comfortable driving position is very easily done because there's lots of adjustment in this wheel. There's lots of adjustment in these electrically adjustable seats as well. You have electrically adjustable lumbar support as well, so these seats are particularly comfy, even over long distances. You also have this massive 12-inch fully digital driver display. And it's really, really good because it's a big screen. It's very easy to see, even if you have your wheel and your seat in a slightly odd position. It's actually quite difficult to block a lot of the screen, which you can't say about lots of other driver displays. The numbers are nice and big. Everything you need to see is very clear, and it's also simple cycling through some different layouts and customizing it yourself as well. Although it's a shame you have to do that through these buttons on the steering wheel here. Now, these aren't anything new. We've seen them in lots of other VWs before, and they're just not very good. It's not immediately obvious when you've pressed something, even though it does give you a kind of haptic feel. And it's also very easy to accidentally trigger something as well. They're just nowhere near as good as separate physical buttons, which VWs used to have. And in fact, some new models are swapping this touch-sensitive panel for physical buttons. So hopefully that trend will continue in the future. Anyway, over here, you have this enormous 15-inch touchscreen infotainment system, which looks like a TV, and it is huge, obviously. It's also packed with different features and menus, and what's really good about it is the integration of Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, because some infotainment systems, even though they give you a really big screen, they might only dedicate a portion of it to Apple CarPlay or Android Auto. But here, on this Touareg, the whole of the screen becomes Apple CarPlay. So if you're using Waze or Google Maps, it's very easy to follow your sat-nav directions, and that is a real bonus for the system. In terms of the software itself, VW has come in for a lot of criticism recently for its infotainment systems, particularly on its early electric cars. They were very glitchy, they were very slow. This is definitely better than that, but it's still not perfect. The graphics look nice and crisp, but there can still be a bit of a delay when you're swiping through things and trying to control different functions. So it would, of course, be better if there were more physical controls to help use this infotainment system. And isn't it a shame that the air conditioning and all the climate controls are also controlled through this touchscreen rather than having separate dials for them? Anyway, what's the quality like in here? Well, for the most part, the materials feel nice. It all feels well put together. There are some cheaper feeling plastics lower down, but for the main, the materials that you see and touch regularly all feel pretty good. And it does feel solid in here. But there isn't really anything particularly amazing about the look or the layout of this interior. There's no kind of wow factor. And given the money and given the rivals that this is up against, that's maybe a little bit of a disappointment compared to those very best interiors in this class. You can see VW's had a go. So you've got things like some knurling on the volume knob here. You've got knurling around these dials as well, but it still doesn't really make it feel like a Bentley Bentayga inside. Now, in terms of practicality, it's fairly good here. You've got this compartment for your wireless phone charging. You've got big cup holders. You've got door bins that are a decent size down here and partly carpeted. You've also got this massive armrest, which is nicely padded and comfortable on long journeys. But underneath it, you actually have a really stingy storage compartment here, which is a bit disappointing. But anyway, this interior is good, if not as good as the very best interiors in this class. However, what its rivals don't have are two sun visors. You can see in the Touareg, you can put one there, you can pull this one down there, and if it's a very sunny day and you're on a twisty road, that's really quite handy, isn't it? So that is something that lots of this car's rivals don't have. This, in fact, is something borrowed from the Bentley Bentayga. And that's not the only thing that's taken from that car. Just like the first generation Touareg, this latest version of VW's SUV shares its underpinnings with a number of other SUVs within the VW group, like the Bentayga, the Audi Q7, and even the Lamborghini Urus. But while platform sharing between some cars means you can essentially end up buying the same car just with a different badge, pretty much all of the cars on VW's so-called MLB Evo platform are really quite different. And you wouldn't, for example, confuse this Touareg's interior with that of the £200,000 Bentaygas, even if they do have the same sun visors. Now, you may have noticed that the Touareg is rather large, and in the rear seats, it is very generous when it comes to space. So even if you're well over 6 foot tall, you're going to have loads of legroom back here. And there's lots of room for your feet under the seat in front of you, even when it's in its lowest position, really loads of room. And it just means you can really stretch out and relax in these rear seats. And this has the standard fit sunroof here, but there's still a decent amount of clearance above my head. So it not only lets in a really nice amount of light, you've got fairly big windows back here as well, but it doesn't impede your rear headroom. So very good when it comes to space. Unfortunately though, there is a rather big lump in the floor here, but still, if you're sitting 3 people side by side, this is a good SUV to do that in. What you can also do with these seats is slide them forwards if you need to create some extra room for the boot. You can slide them back, and you can also recline them as well. So if you really want to lean back and stretch out, you can do exactly that in the Touareg. It really is comfortable and spacious back here. It is a shame though, perhaps, that being such a big car, you don't have an option for 7 seats in your Touareg. This is a 5-seater only. But if you only ever need to take 5 people around in your SUV, then they will be very comfortable in the back of this. The boot in the VW Touareg is absolutely massive. The space that you have back here is like a warehouse, basically. You can fit up to 10 carry-on size suitcases below the parcel shelf, which is the same that you can fit in the Audi Q7, and it's 2 more than you can get in the back of the Mercedes GLE. And you can see the space on offer back here is a nice, easy, simple shape, and there are lots of handy features to point out as well. So for a start, there's hardly any loading lip at the front here, which is very handy. You've also got loads of underfloor storage, unless you've got the optional spare wheel. And if you go for a plug-in hybrid Touareg, then again, you lose quite a lot of this space for all the battery things that are needed for that particular model. But if you don't have a spare wheel, if you don't have a plug-in hybrid, then you get even more space for stuff below the boot floor. Then up here, you've also got these handy hooks either side, which is very useful if you're carrying bags in the back. And there are some buttons here as well. So if you have a tow bar fitted as an optional extra, this is how you get it out and put it away again. And if you have a Touareg with air suspension, which is most versions of this car, then you can use these buttons to lower it down at the back and raise it back up again, which again just helps when you're loading things in and out of the car. Now, if you want to fit as much stuff as possible into the back of the Touareg, the way to do it is first remove the parcel shelf, which can be a little bit fiddly. And unfortunately, there isn't any dedicated space to store it in the car itself, so you have to find somewhere else for it. Now what you can do is use the levers either side of the boot to lower the rear seats, but you can see that when you do use it, you still actually have to go around here yourself to finish the job and flatten them like that. But you can see, with them down, all the space that you have back here, all the space that you have up front, and with the parcel shelf out of the way as well, is about 1,800 litres, which is not dissimilar to a small van. When it comes to the engines, there are 2 diesels to choose from, which are both 3-litre TDI V6s. There's a less powerful one and a more powerful one. If you want petrol power, then you also have 2 choices. There's a 3-litre TSI 340 V6 or a plug-in hybrid version called the e-hybrid. But there's also a performance-focused plug-in hybrid Touareg R. But to be honest, it's the entry-level diesel, which is the pick of the Touareg lineup. It gets 228 brake horsepower, it can do 0 to 62 miles an hour in 7.7 seconds. It has all the grunt you could possibly ever need, and it can tow up to 3,500 kilograms. And in fact, the towing capability of the Touareg is very, very impressive indeed. If you do really want more power, then the car that we've got on this test is the more powerful version of that diesel engine, and it's rapid, very, very strong, but really the entry-level version is all most people will ever need. And also with the diesel engines, it's not like there's some ancient old tractor-like engine rumbling away non-stop under the bonnet. Yes, they can be a bit grumbly when you're idling. You can feel some mild vibrations up through the steering wheel, but for the most part, they're very quiet, very smooth, especially so on the motorway. Whichever Touareg you go for, by the way, you get an 8-speed automatic gearbox. And when you're on the move, the shifts are fine. The problem comes if you're stationary and wanting a sudden burst of acceleration, if you're about to join a roundabout, for example. In that situation, the gearbox can be a bit hesitant to kick into action and actually move you away from being stationary, which is a bit annoying. And similarly, if you are moving and you want a burst of acceleration, then it can also hesitate to kick down and kick you off down the road. So it's not perfect, but in most driving situations, it's good enough. Now, every Touareg, apart from the plug-in hybrid model, gets air suspension as standard. And from a ride comfort perspective, that's very good because it means that this car is very impressive at soaking up lumps and bumps in the road. So ride quality in the Touareg is good. It also means that you can raise the ride height of the car. So that impressive ground clearance, along with having four-wheel drive as standard, means that this is actually surprisingly capable off-road. On the road, the Touareg, for such a big machine, actually steers quite nicely. It's better in that respect than the Volvo XC90, but just bear in mind that there are a lot of very impressive competitors that this is up against. So compared to a BMW X5, a Porsche Cayenne, they are definitely in a different league when it comes to handling than the Touareg. But now let me show you something slightly annoying about this infotainment system. So if you're running Apple CarPlay and you're using Google Maps, let's say you're about to join a massive roundabout that's very confusing, you don't really know where you're going. If at that moment you think, oh, it's a bit hot in here, I'm just going to change the temperature. Whoa! Suddenly you lose all of the screen just dedicated to this tiny little bit to change the temperature. And then suddenly you're at the roundabout, you want to know where you go. Luckily there's a shortcut button up there, which is very small. And you get the sat-nav back, finally. But it does seem ridiculous that you have such a big screen, and if you want to do something as simple as change the temperature, or even just turn your heated seat on, then you lose the entire screen of Apple CarPlay just to turn your heated seat on or adjust the temperature. Rubbish. Anyway, if you want to buy a Touareg, which version should you go for? Well, when it comes to the engines, we think it's the entry-level 3-litre V6 diesel, which makes the most sense. When it comes to trim levels, the engine that you go for really makes the decision for which trim you end up with, because the entry-level diesel is only available in Black Edition models, which is the version that we have here. Even though it's the cheapest version of the Touareg you can buy, it's not like you're missing out on much kit, because you get things like heated front seats, even heated windscreen washer nozzles. You also get wireless phone charging, 4-zone climate control, and an electric tailgate, plus loads of other kit. You can still go mad on the options list though, so this test car has around £10,000 worth of optional extras added to it. So if you want, you can add things like night vision, heated rear seats, a head-up display, soft closed doors, and while lots of the options are worthy and fine if they're within your budget, there aren't that many that are absolute necessities. The only one that we'd really point you towards to consider is four-wheel steering. And what that does is make the turning circle of the Touareg 1 metre tighter. So if you do a lot of miles in town and regularly have to squeeze your car into a tight parking spot, it really makes a big difference and is definitely worth considering. So the Touareg is not cheap, and for the money, it doesn't really stand out against lots of very impressive other rivals. But it's got a strong lineup of engines, it rides well on air suspension, and it's very practical for 5 people. So while ultimately it might not be the best choice for this budget, it still has its strengths. Thanks very much for watching this review. If you want to see another one, then click up there and make sure you're subscribed to see all of our reviews as soon as they go live. If you want to find out more about the Touareg, or if you want a great deal on one, then click on that link to go to whatcar.com.